The wind swept across the open desert like a whisper from the past, carrying with it the scent of dust, freedom, and something forbidden. The horizon burned gold under the sinking sun, and two figures moved fast against a woman and a warrior, bound together by something the world would never forgive. Her hands gripped the reins, her breath sharp against the wind, and her voice broke the silence. "If the world condemns us," she shouted, her tone trembling with defiance and fear. "Ride harder," she ordered, leaning forward until her words brushed against the Apache's ear. He said nothing. His jaw was set, his eyes steady on the distant hills where safety might lure death. The horse beneath them strained with every stride, his hooves pounding against the hard earth, as if the animal itself understood the urgency of their flight. The woman's dark hair whipped across her face, and beneath her tattered shawl, the curve of her belly showed she carried more than hope. The Apache glanced back only once, his face a mask of scars and sunburned strength, knowing they had crossed a line neither of them could return from. Behind them, the smoke of the burning ranch rose into the red sky. It wasn't just a fire, it was the mark of their rebellion. Soldiers would come, and so would her people. Both sides wanted them dead. She had once lived in a world of lace, chapel bells, and promises. He came from one of blood, stone, and silence. Their worlds were never meant to touch, yet somehow they collided violently, beautifully, dangerously. She had been promised to a man she did not love. The wedding had been meant to bind to families and bring peace after years of border conflict. But when she first saw the Apache warrior through the broken gate that night, a man with eyes dark as the storm clouds over the canyon, she knew her fate had already changed. He had been captured, beaten, chained, for crimes that were never his. And when she untied those ropes, when she whispered that single word, "Go," he didn't just take his freedom. He took her heart too. Now, as the stars began to appear over the desert, she could feel her choices closing in on her, like the night itself. "They won't stop until they find us," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of truth. "Ab!" The Apache's reply came low, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Then we keep moving. A river runs west. Beyond it no man will follow." His words gave her strength, but she knew the river wasn't salvation. It was another line to cross, another sign in the eyes of both their worlds. Her hand drifted to her stomach, and she whispered a prayer to the child who hadn't yet seen this cruel land. The wind howled louder, pushing dust into their eyes, but neither slowed. The horse's breath came ragged, the rhythm uneven. She leaned back against him, feeling his heart beat through his chest, the strength of his arm keeping her steady. Somewhere behind them, the faint cry of hounds rose from the valley. The woman's pulse quickened. "They've found us," she said, though she already knew it. The Apache turned his head slightly, scanning the fading light. His hand moved to the knife at his side. He was born for battle, yet now he was fighting for something far more fragile, a woman and an unborn child, both symbols of a world that could never belong to him. The night swallowed the desert whole, leaving only the sound of hooves and heartbeats. The stars above seemed to shimmer closer, as if the heavens themselves leaned down to witness their defiance. "If the world condemns us," she whispered again, softer this time, "let it burn." The Apache's lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile, but his eyes were fierce with determination. They rode through a narrow canyon, the walls closing around them like the jaws of a beast. Every sound echoed, the snort of the horse, the clatter of loose stones, the distant call of a coyote. It was a world that belonged to neither of them, and yet was their only refuge. The woman's mind drifted to what they had left behind. The chapel with its broken door, the man who had sworn vengeance, the cross she had dropped in the dust.
Oh.
She wondered if love could truly survive the weight of sin, or if it would simply be buried under the next sunrise. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, the Apache stopped. The moonlight caught the edges of his face, turning him into something both human and mythical. He looked west, where the river glimmered faintly in the distance. "They will follow the fire," he said. "We'll ride north until dawn." Her body ached, but she nodded, and after dawn she asked. He didn't answer. His silence told her everything. There would be no rest. Not yet. They moved again, slower this time. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of sage and smoke. Her eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. Taking me from them? The Apache's voice was steady, deep. I regret only that I met you too late. Those words settled between them like a brand. She turned her face toward the stars, her throat tight. Every mile they rode was a prayer and a curse. The baby stirred within her, as if sensing the fear and the fire outside. She whispered to it, promising that one day they would find a place where love wasn't hunted, where an Apache and a woman like her could breathe without hiding. But deep down, she feared that such a place didn't exist. Hours passed. The night grew colder, the moon higher. The Apache dismounted and helped her down. They found shelter beneath a cluster of rocks, a small hollow hidden from the open plain. He gathered dry twigs and struck a spark, but the flame burned weak. She sat close, wrapping her arms around her knees. The silence between them was full of unspoken truths. I never thought I'd run from my own people, she said, her voice trembling. They think I've been taken by force. They don't know. She stopped, unsure how to finish. The Apache looked at her with calm eyes. They wouldn't believe you if you told them, he said simply. They don't believe your kind can love mine. She nodded, her eyes glistening. Then let them believe what they want. We'll write our own truth. A coyote's cry cut through the night, sharp and lonely. The Apache's gaze lifted toward the ridge. They're closer than I thought, he muttered. He put out the small flame, plunging them back into darkness. The woman reached for his hand, her fingers trembling but firm. Then we ride again, she said, her courage flickering like that brief fire. He looked at Hearth, this woman who had given up everything and felt something ancient stir within him. She was carrying his child, defying every law written by men, risking every comfort she'd ever known. And yet, she was the one telling him to ride harder. They mounted once more, the horse shivering beneath them as the wind picked up. The stars blurred above, the desert stretching endlessly ahead. The Apache tightened his grip on the reins, his other arm around her waist. For the first time, he didn't know if he was leading her to freedom or ruin. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed again, faint but steady. She turned her head slightly toward him, her eyes catching the light of the moon. If the world condemns us, she said one last time, her voice calm and steady, then let it remember we loved without fear. The Apache pressed his heel into the horse's flank, and they vanished into the night. The canyon swallowed the sound of pursuit. The stars above watched in silence. And somewhere in the distance, between love and survival, the line between sinner and savior blurred forever. The world would call it betrayal. They would call it love. But as the first light of dawn broke over the desert, only the wind knew which one it truly was. The morning sun climbed over the rim of the canyon, turning the land gold and crimson. The Apache stirred first, his instincts sharpened by years of living between peace and war. He listened, the kind of listening that went beyond sound, feeling the earth breathe beneath his palms, the pulse of distant hooves miles away. Beside him, the woman still slept, her face softened in the light, though the shadows beneath her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and fears too heavy for her heart. Her hair had come loose in the wind, strands clinging to her cheek as if the night itself didn't want to let her go. He rose quietly, stepping out from the rocky shelter to study the horizon. The trail they had taken wound south and vanished into the desert haze. Somewhere behind them, men would be tracking the kind of men who didn't give up until blood was found. He knew the soldiers' ways. He had fought them once, years before. They would look for boot prints, for horse tracks, for any sign of defiance that didn't belong to their world. And he knew they would not stop, not for mercy or reason. The woman stirred and opened her eyes, squinting against the light. "How far have we come?" she asked softly. Her voice carried both exhaustion and strength. The Apache turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Far enough for now," he said, "but not far enough to be safe." She pushed herself up slowly, one hand on her side, the other reaching for his arm for balance. He helped her without words, and for a moment they stood together in the stillness, surrounded by the endless stretch of land that neither claimed nor forgave. She looked out across the plain. "I never thought the world could be this wide," she whispered. "Back home, it always felt so small." He followed her gaze, the faint trace of a smile crossing his face. "Your people build fences," he said. "Mine follow the wind." Her eyes softened. "And where does the wind take you?" He looked toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky. "Sometimes home," he said quietly, "sometimes nowhere." They packed what little they had, 2 water skins, a torn blanket, a few pieces of dried meat. The Apache checked the horse's hooves, running his hands over the animal's legs, whispering something in his own language. She watched him, curious, her fingers resting gently on her stomach. "You speak to the horse," she said, almost smiling. "He listens," he replied simply. They began their journey again, the horse moving slowly under the weight of 2 lives and 1 unborn. The air was cool at first, but as the sun rose higher, the heat began to press down, thick and merciless. The woman's skin glistened, her breath shallow. The Apache dismounted halfway across a stretch of dry grass and walked beside her, leading the horse by the reins. "You should ride," she said, her tone soft but firm. "You'll tire before I do." He glanced at her, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "You carry life," he answered. "I carry weight." She didn't argue after that. Hours passed. They stopped by a cluster of mesquite trees where a shallow creek once ran. It was only a bed of cracked clay. The Apache knelt, pressing his hand into the dirt, feeling for moisture. When he found none, he stood again, looking toward the distant hills. "There will be water before night," he said. She nodded, trusting him without question. Her mind drifted back to the night she left. The noise, the shouting, the torches, everything burned into memory like scars. Her father's voice had thundered through the courtyard, calling her name, accusing her of betrayal. She remembered the cold steel of the gate lock and the sound of the horse's hooves when she fled into the dark. She hadn't looked back, not once, though her heart had screamed for the home she was leaving behind. It wasn't love that kept her there, it was fear. And when the Apache appeared at the edge of the firelight, bound and beaten, something inside her broke free. "You could have left me," he had said that night when the chains fell away. "Why didn't you?" She hadn't known how to answer. Maybe it was mercy, maybe madness. Or maybe it was the first time she'd seen truth in a man's eyes. As the sun began to sink again, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, they found a hollow near the base of a rocky ridge. A small trickle of water ran through the stones, enough for the horse to drink. The Apache filled their skins and handed one to her. She drank deeply, the coolness washing away the dryness in her throat. He watched her, silent as ever, but there was something gentler in his eyes. Now, something that didn't belong to the warrior the world feared. She broke the silence. "Tell me about your people," she said. He was quiet for a long moment before he answered. "We lived where the river bends and the mountains touch the sky. We hunted when the land gave, and we prayed when it took, and the soldiers came. They built walls where there were none, took our horses, our sons. The rest ran." She swallowed hard, her voice low. "And you?" He looked toward the horizon. "I stayed to fight." The wind shifted then, bringing the faint scent of smoke again. The Apache stiffened, every muscle alert. "They're closer," he said under his breath. The woman felt the air tighten around them, fear crawling up her spine. "Can they find us here?" she asked. "Not tonight," he said, but his tone carried little comfort. They ate little that evening. The stars came out one by one, bright and watchful. She sat close to him by the dying embers of their small fire. The silence between them grew heavy again, filled with the things they couldn't say. Finally she spoke. "Do you think we'll ever stop running?" He looked at her, the firelight flickering across his face. "The earth is wide," he said, "but men's hate is wider." Her eyes dropped, her hand resting once more on her belly. "Then maybe this child will change that," she whispered. "Maybe he'll live in a world where love doesn't have to hide." He didn't answer, but his hand covered hers for a brief moment, rough skin against soft. The gesture said more than words ever could. Somewhere far off, the howl of a wolf broke the quiet night. The Apache rose instantly, listening. The sound came again low, long, but not from an animal. It was a signal. His pulse quickened. He moved to the horse, checking the saddle, his knife, the path behind them. The woman stood, fear tightening her chest. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders," he said. "2, maybe 3. Scouts." Her breath caught. "They found us." He nodded once. He led the horse closer, helping her mount. "We go north," he said. "They follow. We'll make them lose the trail in the rocks." She hesitated, her voice shaking. "And if they don't lose it," his eyes met hers, steady, strong. "Then we fight." The sound of hooves grew faint but steady. The Apache swung up behind her, and together they rode into the night again, the desert wind screaming around them. The moonlight washed the land silver, showing every stone, every shadow. Her heart pounded as she clung to him, the rhythm of the chase matching the rhythm of her pulse. The sound behind them faded for a while, swallowed by the wind, but the Apache didn't slow. He knew better than to trust silence. The night had tricks of its own. The woman leaned against him, her strength waning, her fear heavy. "If they catch us," she began, but he cut her off.
They won't.
His certainty was enough to keep her from breaking, yet deep inside she knew the danger hadn't passed. Every breath they took was borrowed. Every mile they covered brought them closer to something they didn't yet understand. When dawn finally touched the edge of the world, they stopped near a stretch of riverbed, glimmering with faint mist. The Apache helped her down, his eyes scanning the horizon again. She sank to her knees, cupping water into her hands, the coldness biting her skin. The world was quiet, but the quiet carried a warning. Somewhere out there, someone still followed. She could feel it the same way she had felt it the night she chose to run, the night everything familiar turned to ash. As the Apache fixed the saddle again, she looked at him. "You ever think we'll belong anywhere?" she asked softly, paused, looking back at her. "Belonging is for those who are not hunted," he said. "We live by the wind now." The sun rose higher, burning away the mist. He reached for her hand, helping her back onto the horse. "Hold tight," he said, his voice low but steady. "We ride until the world forgets our names." And as they moved once more across the endless land, the shadows of their past followed close behind, silent but never gone. The river curved north, and the wind carried the faint sound of pursuit again, like a warning carried through time. The woman turned her face toward the light, whispering a prayer for the unborn life she carried on for the man who risked everything to protect it. They'd escaped once, but the world was still hunting. And somewhere beyond the ridge, destiny was waiting, patient and unmerciful. The river narrowed as it wound through the barren valley, its edges marked by pale stones that looked like the bones of the earth. The Apache guided the horse carefully along the shallows, watching the ripples spread from each step. He knew the soldiers used the river to track their prey. The water could hide their scent for a while, but not forever. Behind him, the woman clung to the saddle horn, her face pale from exhaustion. She hadn't spoken in hours, her mind trapped between fear and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her. When they finally reached the far bank, the Apache paused and turned toward the distant ridges. Smoke still stained the horizon behind them, a dark wound against the sky. He studied it for a long moment, silent and tense. "They've burned the trail," he said at last. "They want us trapped between the river and the mountains." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "Can we make it through?" He didn't answer right away. "We move before nightfall," he said. "But the hills are rough, and you're tired." Her hand drifted to her stomach. "We don't have a choice," she whispered. The Apache nodded. He had seen bravery in battle before, but not like hers. It was quieter, heavier, born of love rather than rage. He helped her down from the horse to rest in the shade of a large boulder. The land stretched endlessly around them, silent except for the sighing wind. He took a strip of dried meat from his pouch and handed it to her. "Eat," he said. She hesitated, then tore a small piece. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. He shrugged. "I have enough from the river." She smiled faintly, though her eyes told him she didn't believe it. While she rested, he moved ahead to scout the ridge. The land sloped upward, a maze of stones and narrow gullies. He studied the tracks, some fresh, some days old, hoof prints. Not soldiers this time. Settlers. They had moved through recently, maybe chasing the same trail. His jaw tightened. Settlers meant danger in another way. They didn't need uniforms to kill an Apache. He returned to where she sat, staring at the horizon with distant eyes. "There's a small cabin 2 miles north," he said. "Abandoned, maybe. We can stay there before dark." She looked uncertain. "What if someone's there?" "Then we ride past," he replied. "But if it's empty, it'll give you rest." The ride toward the cabin was long and quiet. The woman leaned against him, her strength fading with every step of the horse. He could feel her trembling, though she tried to hide it. The child within her was restless. He felt it too, a strange, small reminder that something innocent was tied to their sin. As the shadows lengthened, the cabin appeared ahead. A small shape crouched beneath a rocky slope, half hidden by wild brush. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, and the door hung crooked. The Apache dismounted first, scanning the area before helping her down. The place smelled of age and dust, but there was no sign of recent life. Inside, the cabin was bare, except for a broken table, a few scattered tools, and a blanket stiff with dirt. The woman touched the wall gently, as if the wood itself carried memories. "Someone once lived here," she murmured. He didn't answer. He barred the door and checked the window. "Should sleep," he said. "We'll move again before sunrise." She nodded and lay down on the blanket. The Apache sat by the door, his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the fading light outside. He could hear the wind shifting, the distant cry of a hawk, the faint echo of something heavier metal striking stone. He stiffened. Someone was near, waited, every sense alive. The sound came again, closer now, and then faded. When it didn't return, he exhaled quietly. Still, sleep didn't come to him that night. The woman dreamed restlessly, her hands moving against the blanket, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. When she woke near dawn, the Apache was already outside, standing near the stream behind the cabin. He had found footprints there, 2 men, maybe 3, moving along the ridge. The tracks were new. "They passed close," he said when she joined him. "Too close." "Are they soldiers?" He shook his head. "Settlers. But they carry rifles, and that's enough." They broke camp quickly. As they rode north, the woman's thoughts wandered to the world behind her, the father who had raised her to believe that bloodlines were sacred, that pride was worth more than truth. She wondered what he thought now, if he imagined her dead or worse. There had been love between them once, before politics and promises turned him hard. She remembered the night he arranged her marriage, the way his voice trembled, even as he insisted it was the right thing. He hadn't known she'd already met the Apache by then, already found something in his silence that no promise could match. As the sun climbed higher, they followed a winding trail into the hills. The land grew wilder, the wind colder. The Apache stopped often to scan the terrain, his instincts guiding them through unseen paths. Yet even his caution couldn't erase the feeling that they were being followed. By noon, they came upon the remains of an old mission. The stone walls had crumbled, but parts of the roof still stood. The woman looked at it with a mix of awe and sorrow. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "even in ruin." He led the horse inside what was once the courtyard. "We'll rest here," he said. As they settled, the echo of hoofbeats reached them faintly. The Apache froze, his hand going to his rifle. The sound was distant but steady. He led the horse deeper into the ruins, away from open sight. The woman clutched his arm, her fear breaking through her calm. "They're coming, aren't they?" He nodded once. "Stay here," he said. He climbed one of the half-fallen walls, crouching low. From the ridge above, 3 riders appeared, their shapes dark against the sky. Settlers, just as he'd guessed. One of them wore a wide hat and carried a long rifle. They stopped near the mission ruins, scanning the area. The Apache watched in silence, every muscle tense. One of the men dismounted and walked toward the entrance, his boots crunching on the gravel. The woman could hear him now, the sound of metal clinking against his belt. She pressed her back against the wall, her breath shallow. The Apache waited until the man was close, then dropped silently from the wall, his knife flashing in the early light. The man barely turned before the Apache's hand covered his mouth, dragging him to the ground. He didn't kill him, Eiley struck hard enough to silence him. Then he dragged the body behind a pile of stones and looked back at the woman. "Go," he whispered. She hesitated, fear freezing her. "What about the others?" "They won't wait long," he said. "We ride east. The hills will hide us." They slipped away through the back of the mission as the other 2 men called out for their missing friend. The woman climbed onto the horse, her hands shaking. The Apache mounted behind her, his face hard and focused. They rode through the narrow gullies, every heartbeat a race against discovery. When the gunshot came, it shattered the silence. A bullet struck the rock beside them, sending splinters flying. The horse reared and she cried out, clutching the reins. The Apache steadied the animal and urged it forward. Dust and echoes filled the air as more shots followed. The sound of pursuit grew louder. They rode until the world blurred around them, until the horse stumbled from exhaustion. Finally, in the cover of a canyon, they stopped. The Apache dismounted and checked the ridge. The men hadn't followed, at least not yet. The woman slid down, her body trembling. "They'll kill you for me," she whispered. "For us." He turned to her, his face unreadable. "They'd kill me no matter what I carry beside me." She looked at him, eyes wide with sorrow. "Then why keep running?" He took a breath, his gaze distant. "Because once, before all this, I dreamed of peace. You made me believe it could still exist." She felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "And if that dream dies," he looked at her, his voice low but steady, "then we die with it." The wind picked up, howling through the canyon. Above them, the first dark clouds of a coming storm began to gather. The land seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Somewhere far behind, men were still hunting. And ahead, the unknown stretched wider than ever. The Apache lifted his rifle and scanned the distance one last time before leading her deeper into the narrow pass. The storm moved closer, thunder rolling across the sky like a warning. The woman clung to his hand, her fear mingled with something stronger faith. They didn't know if the next sunrise would bring freedom or death. But as lightning split the horizon, their shadows merged against the stone. Two souls bound by defiance, caught between love and a world that refused to understand it. The storm struck before they reached the upper ridge, fierce and relentless. Lightning ripped through the sky, lighting up the canyon walls like a warning from heaven. The Apache pulled the horse beneath an overhang of stone, rain pouring down in sheets that turned the ground into flowing mud. The woman trembled as thunder rolled across the land, the sound echoing through her bones. Her clothes clung to her skin, heavy with water, and the cold bit deep. The Apache tore his cloak in half and wrapped it around her shoulders, his eyes scanning the ridge even through the downpour. He could sense movement above, faint but deliberate shadows against the flashes of light. They weren't alone. She saw it too. A flicker of metal, the glint of a rifle in the storm's light. Her breath caught, and she gripped his arm. "They found us," she whispered. The Apache nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "They're waiting for the rain to stop," he said. "They know the trail ends here." Her eyes widened, and were trapped. He looked toward the slope behind them. "Not yet," he said. "There's a path through the rocks. It's dangerous, but it leads to the ridge above." The rain fell harder, drumming on the stone. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding louder than the thunder. "If we take it," she asked, "can we make it?" He didn't lie to her. "Maybe." The horse shivered under them, tired from the long chase. The Apache placed his hand on its neck, whispering something in his native tongue, a prayer or promise she couldn't understand. "We move now," he said. They climbed into the rain, the narrow path slick and steep. The horse stumbled more than once, hooves sliding on wet rock. The woman held on tight, every muscle trembling. The Apache led the way, one hand gripping the reins, the other ready at his side. Behind them, thunder masked the faint sound of voices. The men were closer than he'd hoped. Halfway up the ridge, the path narrowed to a ledge no wider than a man's foot. The Apache turned, helping her down. "We walk from here," he said. She nodded, too afraid to speak. The rain washed over her face, mixing with tears she didn't realize she was shedding. The climb was slow and brutal. Wind howled through the cracks in the stone, tearing at their clothes. Each step felt like a fight against the mountain itself. The woman slipped once, crying out as her foot gave way. The Apache caught her arm just in time, pulling her against the wall. For a moment they stood there, breathing hard, pressed close as the storm raged around them. His hand stayed on her shoulder, steady and strong. "Don't look down," he said. She nodded, forcing herself forward. The ridge seemed endless, every inch carved by danger. The Apache could see faint light ahead, a break in the storm where the sky opened over the high plateau. They were almost there. But then the sound of a gunshot cracked through the rain. The bullet hit the stone near his head, spraying rock dust across his face. He pulled her down instantly, shielding her with his body. Another shot followed, echoing through the canyon. "They're above us," she gasped. He looked toward the ridge. "No," he said grimly. "They've split. Some above, some below." The woman's heart pounded. "Then what do we do?" He studied the slope ahead. He climbed faster. They moved again, their bodies slick with rain, their breath visible in the cold air. Apache's muscles burned, but he didn't slow. Each time lightning flashed, he saw movement along the rim shadow shifting, rifles raised. He knew they couldn't outrun bullets, but he also knew this mountain better than any soldier. When they reached the top, the world opened before them, a vast plateau stretching into the dark. The storm began to ease, the rain softening into mist. But there was no time to rest. The Apache turned sharply, scanning the horizon. "We head for the rocks," he said, pointing toward a cluster of boulders. "They'll have to come through open ground to reach us." They ran for cover, mud splashing underfoot. The woman stumbled, and he caught her again, pulling her behind the rocks. Just as another shot tore through the air, the bullet struck close, a warning that the hunters were near. She pressed against the stone, her breath coming fast. "They'll kill us," she said, her voice breaking. "They won't stop until they do." He looked at her, his face calm, but his eyes burning with something fierce. "Then they'll have to earn it," he said. He loaded his rifle, his movements steady, despite the tension. She watched him, realizing how many times he must have done this before, how many times he'd stood between death and survival. He glanced at her once more, his hand brushing her cheek briefly, the touch both a promise and a farewell. "If I tell you to run," he said, "you run. Don't look back." She shook her head, tears shining in the faint light. "I won't leave you. You will," he said firmly. "For the child." The wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats. The men were coming closer. The Apache crouched low, watching the ridgeline. Shadows appeared, 3 riders, then 5, moving carefully through the clearing. They spread out, rifles ready. He counted quietly under his breath. 5, maybe 6, he murmured. 2 in front, the rest behind. She could barely breathe. "Ak, can you fight them all?" He didn't answer. His focus was absolute. The first man dismounted, crouching behind a rock not far from them. The Apache raised his rifle slowly, waited, and fired. The crack echoed through the still air, and the man fell without a sound. The others shouted, scattering for cover. Gunfire exploded across the plateau. The woman ducked low, covering her ears as bullets struck the stone around her. The Apache fired again, then again, each shot precise, controlled. But for every one he dropped, another shadow appeared in the mist. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, sharp and bitter. The horse, tied a few yards away, reared and screamed. The woman cried out, crawling toward it instinctively, but the Apache caught her arm. "Stay," he ordered. She froze, trembling. The sound of boots crunching on wet ground grew louder. One of the men was circling behind them. The Apache turned, his knife flashing in his hand. He moved with the silence of a predator, disappearing into the mist. The woman waited, her pulse hammering. She heard a struggle, grunts, a choked gasp, pan, then silence. The Apache returned, blood on his sleeve, his expression unchanged. "They'll come again," he said. "More will follow the smoke." Her voice broke. "Then where do we go?" He looked toward the western horizon where the clouds were thinning. "Beyond that ridge," he said quietly, "there's a canyon, a sacred place. They won't follow there." He helped her onto the horse again, his movements quick. Gunfire echoed once more as they rode into the mist, bullets cutting through the air. One grazed his arm, tearing the cloth. He didn't flinch. The woman turned, fear twisting her face. "You're hurt," she cried. "It's nothing," he said through gritted teeth. "Hold tight." They galloped across the open plain, the sound of pursuit fading and returning in waves. The storm had left the ground slick, the horse slipping with every stride. The Apache's vision blurred for a moment, the pain in his arm spreading, but he forced himself to stay focused. The canyon wasn't far. As they neared the edge, the ground began to slope downward into a narrow valley shrouded in fog. He slowed the horse, leading it through the rocks. The woman clung to him, her breath warm against his neck. Every sound in the canyon seemed louder, the drip of water, the echo of their steps, the faint call of a bird overhead. When they reached the canyon floor, he finally stopped. The air here was cooler, filled with the scent of damp earth and sage. She looked around, confused. "What is this place?" He looked toward the dark cliffs rising on either side. "My mother was born here," he said softly. It's where my people prayed for rain, for life. She touched his hand. And maybe it'll protect us too. He wanted to believe that. But even here he could feel the danger closing in. The echoes above told him the riders had found the trail again. The woman saw the look in his eyes and understood. "They're coming," she said. He nodded once. "It won't stop now." The tension in the air was unbearable, like the moment before a storm returns. The Apache checked his rifle, his knife, his last few rounds. She watched him, her heart breaking with every motion. "What if we don't make it?" she whispered. He turned to her, his face lit faintly by the dying light filtering through the canyon. "Then let them remember we tried." She reached for him, their hands meeting briefly, a silent promise between them. The sound of hoofbeats echoed above the canyon now, followed by the metallic click of rifles being readied. The Apache looked up toward the rim. "Stay here," he said quietly. "No matter what you hear, stay." She wanted to protest, but his eyes stopped her. Climbed the rock swiftly, vanishing into the mist and shadow above. The woman stood below, trembling, one hand over her heart, the other resting protectively on her stomach. The sound of gunfire erupted moments later, sharp, distant, then closer. The echoes filled the canyon, mingling with the wind. She looked up, calling his name, but only the storm answered. The world around her fell silent again, heavy with dread. The rain began to fall once more, soft at first, then harder, washing away the tracks that led to the place where fate waited for them both. The gunfire faded slowly, replaced by the heavy sound of rain spilling over the cliffs. The woman stood motionless at the base of the canyon, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Every sound above her felt sharper, the roll of thunder, the rattle of falling stones, the distant echo of shouts. She wanted to climb after him, to see him, to know he was alive, but his last words held her in place. "Stay here, no matter what you hear." The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and wet earth down to where she stood. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her chest. The child inside her kicked once, a small reminder that life still moved forward even when the world was breaking apart. She whispered to it, her voice barely audible. "He'll come back," promised. Minutes stretched into hours. The rain softened into mist, and the canyon grew eerily quiet. She couldn't tell if the silence meant safety or the end. When the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, she gathered her courage and began to climb. Her shoes slipped against the wet stone, and every pull of her arms burned with exhaustion. Still, she kept going. When she reached the ridge, the world opened around her, wide, cold, and hauntingly still. The ground was scarred by hoofprints and fallen shells, the aftermath of what had been a fierce fight. Smoke rose faintly from a patch of grass where a rifle had caught fire. She stepped forward, calling his name softly, her voice carried by the wind. There was no answer. Then, between the rocks near the edge, she saw movement. A figure lay half-hidden beneath a broken branch. Her breath caught as she stumbled toward him. The Apache's body was still, his face turned toward the pale morning sky. Blood stained his arm and shoulder, but when she touched his cheek, warmth met her fingertips. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding her face. "You didn't stay," he whispered, a weak smile touching his lips. She knelt beside him, tears falling freely now. "You told me not to look back," she said, her voice breaking. "But how could I go without you?" He tried to sit, but she stopped him, pressing her hand against his chest. "Don't move," she said. "You're hurt." He looked toward the canyon below, then at the sky. "They're gone," he said faintly. "The storm took the trail." The earth covered the rest. She followed his gaze. The rain had washed away nearly every trace of the battle. It was as if the mountain itself had chosen to forget what had happened. She turned back to him, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. "Then it's over," she said softly. He smiled again, but there was sorrow in his eyes. "Nothing ends," he murmured. "It only changes shape." She didn't fully understand, but she held his hand tightly, as if her grip alone could keep him anchored to the world. "We'll find somewhere safe," she said. "A place where no one knows our names." He studied her face, the determination in her voice. "The world is wide," he said. "But it remembers." They stayed like that until the sun rose higher, spreading warmth across the land. She helped him to his feet slowly, supporting his weight with her shoulder. Every step down the ridge was careful, deliberate. The horse had wandered nearby, waiting as if it understood. Together, they reached the canyon floor once more, the air now calm and bright after the long storm. The Apache rested against the rocks while she tended his wound with what little she had left.
Ow.
She tore a part of her skirt to wrap the bandage, tightening it until he winced. "Live," she said, half as a promise, half as a prayer. He looked at her, his dark eyes steady. "Because you will it," he said softly. They traveled slowly over the next few days, following the river west. The world around them began to change, green returned to the land, and birds sang again. It was the first time in weeks that she felt the weight of fear lifting, even if only slightly. The Apache spoke little, saving his strength, but his silence was no longer heavy with distance. It was the kind that carried peace. At night they camped near a small grove of cottonwoods. The fire crackled softly as the stars stretched endlessly above. She lay close to him, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. "Do you ever think about before?" she asked quietly. He opened his eyes, looking at the flames. "Before what?" "Before me," she said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There was only war. Now there's reason." Her eyes filled again, but this time not from sorrow. She touched his hand, her fingers tracing the scars along his knuckles. "They'll tell stories about you," she said. "Spout us." He turned his head toward her. "Stories fade," he said, "but the land remembers." The days grew warmer, the air sweeter. They reached a valley surrounded by cliffs and tall grass. Water ran clear from a spring that cut through the middle. The Apache stopped his horse at the ridge, looking down with quiet awe. "This place," he said. "My mother spoke of it. She said it was where the wind sleeps." The woman smiled faintly. "Then maybe we can rest here too." They made a small camp near the spring. He built a shelter from fallen branches and bark, while she gathered wild herbs and tended the fire. The work was slow, but it gave them rhythm, something to build a life around. For the first time, she let herself dream of the child growing inside her, of days that didn't begin in fear. At night, she would sit beside him and listen to the sounds of the valley, the rustle of grass, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of water. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked once. The Apache looked at the sky. "Maybe," he said, "but not before we live." Weeks passed. His wounds healed, though the scar would always remain. She grew heavier with each day, her steps slower, but her smile brighter. He carved a small wooden figure for the child, a bird in flight. "So it remembers what it means to be free," he said when he gave it to her. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, she stood at the edge of the spring, her reflection shimmering in the water. The Apache came to her side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. She turned toward him, her eyes glowing in the fading light, leaving them. She said, "But sometimes I think about what the world might say." He nodded slowly. "The world condemns what it fears." She smiled faintly, echoing her first words to him months ago. "Then let it condemn us." They laughed quietly, the sound blending with the wind. For the first time, laughter didn't feel dangerous. It felt like home. That night, under the silver wash of moonlight, the woman gave birth. The cries of the newborn echoed through the valley like the start of a new story. The Apache held the child in his arms, his rough hands trembling as he looked into the tiny, blinking face. "A son," he whispered. She leaned back, exhausted but radiant. "He looks like you," she said. He shook his head gently. "He looks like the sky after a storm." In the days that followed, life settled into a fragile peace. The Apache hunted near the river, bringing back food and stories of the wild things that roamed nearby. The woman sang to their child, songs from her mother's prayers mixed with words she learned from him. The baby grew stronger, his laughter soft and pure against the sounds of the land. Sometimes, she would see him standing on the ridge at sunset, watching the horizon, his face unreadable. She knew he still feared what might come, that one day the world would remember, and their peace would be taken again. But until that day they had this valley, this moment. Seasons shifted. Grass turned gold, then green again. Their son learned to walk, his small hands reaching for the world. The woman often told him, "You were born where the wind sleeps. Remember that?" The Apache listened in silence, a faint smile touching his lips. He knew the land had claimed them both, turning their pain into something eternal. Years later, when the child was old enough to ask where they came from, she simply said, "From two hearts that refused to live in fear." And when the boy grew older still, he would climb the same ridge his father once fought upon and look out at the endless plains. The wind would rise, soft and steady, carrying voices of the past. If the world ever remembered them, it would not be as fugitives or sinners, but as two souls who defied the fire to create life from it. The story of the Apache and the woman who rode against the world became part of the land's breaths, something untamed, something beautiful, and something that could never truly die.